Good morning, everyone, and welcome from all parts of the country. Great to see you here. Liverpool, Croydon, London. I think I saw Derby, Guildford, Bedfordshire, Teesside, Warsaw. Amazing. Good to have you here. Brisbane. Wow. Welcome. Sunny Southampton. Glad to hear you've got the sunshine as well this morning. Sunny Salisbury. So we will get going in about 1 minute. We can see people are still edging their way in quite quickly. So, oh, I just saw someone from my home county of Cornwall is here. Welcome. Hope the sun is shining for you in Cornwall. Cornishman from Truro. Excellent. And further north, Trebarwith, so on the coast. Bank of England, hello. Have I frozen? No. I think you might have frozen, whoever asked. Would be bad luck, wouldn't it, if I had frozen before we start. Word association. Each time I see frozen, I've got that funny song that you have when you from the play from looking after too many children too much of the time. Let it go. Okay, let's get going, and welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us on My Whole Self Day. This webinar about creating a healthy and inclusive workforce is really an important hour that we'll spend together just talking about what does my whole self really mean within the workplace, and why is it important that we are able to take our whole selves to work. Before I say anything more about the campaign, I'd just like to get our panel to introduce themselves. I'm Simon Blake. I'm the Chief Executive of Mental Health First Aid England. I also chair the Support After Suicide Partnership, the Dying Matters campaign, and Headspace International Advisory Board, all of which is a real privilege to be able to do. I'm Cornish, as I've already said, and I will continue to say, and I partly say that now more than I did before we left the EU, and should probably start a campaign for Cornwall to be a separate country in order to get membership, given I've got no Irish citizenship. I'm gay, I'm a horse and dog lover, chief exec, and compassionate. So there are lots of other things which I could have said or put on that selfie. The one thing which I just say that I did think this morning is my brother died a few years ago, and I used to always have brother, and it was one of the main parts of my identity. And so it's interesting that I didn't put that on there, because I still feel very much like a brother, but interesting which bits of identities come to the forefront at different times. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about themselves, and as they do so, obviously we don't want to advocate multitasking all the time. It's not supposed to be good for us, but do feel free to share anything that you want to share about yourselves in the chat. So this is a webinar which is really about bringing all of ourselves, our humanity, into the workplace. So do feel free to play in the chat, obviously within the boundaries of professionalism and the rules of valuing and respecting each other in the way you do. But do feel free to use the chat. So Alice, can I ask you to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. My name is Alice Jennison, and I am the Inclusion and Diversity Manager for Skanska, which is a Swedish construction company operating in the UK. A bit about my professional life. I've spent the last 5 years leading diversity and inclusion, working alongside High Speed 2. And prior to that, I actually sat in our sustainability team where I've worked in Sweden and Norway in the past too. I am really passionate about behavioural change and where that sits within inclusion and diversity as well too. So not only around individual behaviours, but organisational behaviours. And we might talk about that a little later today too. And then outside of work, I at least twice a week will be found in some sort of body of water. I love swimming. I swim in the sea, I swim in the lakes, I swim in the rivers, and I try to do it all year round. I really, really enjoy that. It makes me feel like I can be my complete self. I find it quite meditative, just being in the water. I also have 2 black Labradors called Chili and Fig, so I really enjoy working those. And I am a bit of a disastrous gardener. Some things go well. I'm not bad at growing carrots. Some things are a bit more hit and miss as well too, but that's a bit about me.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Alice, Asif.
Thanks, Simon, and good morning, everyone, and good afternoon if you're not in the UK, or good evening if you're anywhere else in the world. Just a bit about myself. So I'm currently the Senior Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at WarnerMedia, where I head up everything in international, which is everything outside the US, both internally and externally, that WarnerMedia looks at. You might not know WarnerMedia, but it's the company that looks after Warner Brothers, CNN, HBO Max, Cartoon Network, and a few other entities. It's interesting. I was listening, to Simon's intro, and one of the things which really stood out for me as well is there's many parts to me, as you can see from the picture, but they intersect at different points. There's different days when different things are more important. There's days when being a father is very important, when I'm rushing to pick my kids from nursery and it's at the forefront of my mind. There's days when my neurodiversity, when I get a big file, so I'm dyslexic and very proud to be dyslexic. There's days when I get a big, large file come through and I'm like, oh God, not another huge piece to read. And there's days my identity, it shifts, depending on, whether it's my faith, whether it's other elements to who I am. So there's many layers to me. And what I found as well is, as I've gone through life in different stages, at different points in my life, different things have been important. And also I am aware that the older I'm getting, there's other elements that might become important to me that, or part of my identity that weren't there before, especially when we think of disabilities, both visible and non-visible. I'm very mindful of that. So it's fascinating that our whole self, or our authentic self, can shift, can change, and there's so many elements to it, both visible and non-visible, which I think is really important, because I do find a lot of times people only attach to what they see, not what they can't see, but we need to be mindful of that whole self that person has.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Jolawn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today all around the world. My name is Jolawn Victor, and I'm the Chief International Officer at Headspace Health. We sell the app Headspace, which is a meditation and mindfulness app with over thousands of hours to help you build your mindfulness muscle, go to sleep, stay asleep, fall back asleep at night. We've got focused music, as well as many other pieces of content. And today we're here to talk about who is our whole selves. There's some words there that are just a piece of who I am. So leading compassionately is something that I try to model and learn from others and exhibit. I'm a budget nerd, which is super silly, and like the engineer in me coming out. I've been known to drive 30 kilometers for a slice of key lime pie from the right locale. And early in my career, I had children, and I found that I was doing something called covering, where I wouldn't have photos of my kids on my desk because I was concerned that I would be overlooked for stretch and ambitious opportunities because I had so many children. So I'm a proud mom of 3 and an expat from America. So thanks for having me here.
Thanks very much, Jolawn. Thank you all for sharing a bit of yourself. And as Alice talked about her dogs, I do need to just say my animals. My dog is named Dolly after Dolly Parton, and I have a horse that I inherited with the name Boris, named after nobody famous, as far as I'm concerned, certainly. So it's great to have you here as the panel. So My Whole Self is brought to you by MHFA England. It's a campaign for workplace culture change, and we're really talking about trying to get every single organisation to empower employees to bring their whole self to work and to have that self valued and respected. And of course, it is not a one day a year job. It is every single day of the year, and that we really want this to be a moment in the year where, as well as thinking about raising that through the selfies and other activities that you might do in your workplace, is really a moment for us to pause and think about the things that we're getting right and doing well to enable everybody to be able to bring their best self to work, their whole self, to feel confident, and what we can do better. It's really about putting diversity and inclusion at the heart of our approaches, and making sure that we understand that how we think about different identities, different parts of people's identities, is absolutely intrinsically linked to the well-being strategies, and that if we do it properly, that we will create that positive transformation in workplace mental health, not mental health, and performance. And a person said to me, it really struck a chord with me: if I'm worried about people finding out who I really am at work, how on earth do you think I'm going to be able to do my best work? If I can just focus on the job in hand, then I'm going to do a much better job than if I'm worried that people are going to find out that I'm non-binary. And so that particular person, it was about their gender identity, but Jolawn just talked about hiding children, other people. It might be their neurodiversity, it might be all sorts of things. So we've got to ensure that people feel like they've got the safety and freedom to express themselves freely, that they'll be respected and valued, and they'll get the credit for the work that they're doing, that they will get absolutely the same opportunities that other people do. And it's not just enough to say that people are able to do that. The most important thing in this is that people feel as though they're able to do that. It's no point a chair or a chief exec saying, we want you to bring your whole self at work, if that doesn't actually match to how people feel about being in the workplace. So I'm just going to start off. I'm going to ask Asif to start us off. What does bringing your whole self to work mean to you?
Thanks, Simon. And I mean, it's interesting. I was reflecting a lot on what this question really and truly means to me. And I think it's a few things. First, it's about not having to leave who I am at the door. And what I mean by that is that many a times, you find people have to code switch. You might have come across that term where you have to sort of, fit in or be like everyone else, or say the right things because that's the culture. For me, it is about really not leaving any part of my identity and, being able to bring my authentic self to the workplace. Now, that involves having psychological safety, which I think is hugely important. Many a times, a lot of organizations, a lot of companies talk about bringing your whole self to work, or, we value difference in every respect, but then you're asked to leave who you are at the door, or there isn't the psychological safety to speak up or to bring that authentic self. So I think for me, it's about having that psychological safety whereby, and what do I mean by psychological safety? Well, actually, where I can stand up and give a different opinion and not be judged, where I can give a different perspective and not have any consequences for saying it, where my ideas are heard just as much as anyone else's ideas in the workplace. But also where I can be part of the out group. And what I mean by out group is if everyone likes one thing, but I like something else, if everyone's part of, if everyone supports, for a UK example, if everyone supports, let's say, Manchester United, and I don't, it shouldn't be a problem. So whatever difference I have should be valued and appreciated within that space. But also what I just want to mention on this is bringing my whole self, for me, since I started doing it, which has been very recently, and a lot of people are shocked when I say it's more a recent thing rather than the 20-year career I've had. But when I was able to bring my whole self, it absolutely liberated me. You know, half the energy that was consumed in trying to fit in was gone. That energy was then, redirected towards actually doing my job really well. And that's meant the world to me, that I can just focus on being good at what I do, or being productive, rather than having to worry about, how I look, how I sound, am I saying the right thing? Am I part of the right clubs? So it is absolutely liberating. And that's been the biggest, most powerful thing for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jolawn.
Ironically, for me, part of bringing my whole self to work does include code switching. As an American who's now lived in Australia and London, who's also Black, I find that I have multiple sets of vocabulary. And sometimes it is more convenient to use the vocabulary of the culture that I'm a part of. And there becomes a sense of education and teaching that comes with that too. I remember in one of my first roles, when my birthday rolled around, I taught my manager that there is actually a happy birthday song that's really popular in the Black community that Stevie Wonder sings. And that's the song that you sing first before you sing the traditional happy birthday song. I find that, different words that I've used in different cultures, I have the ability to share and bring awareness that the one way that maybe you approach or see the world is not the only way that the world sees it. So that's the first aspect of myself, of bringing my whole self to work. The second thing is humanizing, right, the experience. So if my team knows, if you work with me at any point in time, a child might walk into the room. And so that's part of my life, and I don't hide those things, but I also want to preserve the experience that I have with individuals. So, I don't let children, distract the conversation, but part of living what I call now on TV and our lives being broadcasted means that we have to have a comfort with some of those things that are just part of our everyday life. And then the last piece around bringing my whole self to work is transparency and being honest about the things that you're comfortable sharing. And for me, I had a lot of struggles with miscarriage while trying to build my family. And that was something that whenever I was pregnant, I would tell my manager, because it was too much anxiety for me to not be there and not have a good reason of explaining it, and having people wonder why I'm here, why I'm not. So those are the three things of many more things that it brings for me to bring my whole self to work.
Thank you, Jolawn, and thank you for sharing. And obviously, miscarriage is a topic which we know we need to talk far more about in society and in the workplace as well. So thank you very much for sharing. Alice.
Yeah, thank you. For me personally, a bit like Asif said, bringing my whole self to work is definitely a journey. And I wouldn't say I've cracked it all just yet, but I think, it goes without saying, during the pandemic, we've seen into other people's lives in a much different way than we had previously. I'm somebody who is really relationships driven. So I work best when I know the person I'm working with, and it's really important to me that I tap into what's going on in my team and what's going on in their personal lives too. And that can lead me to ask a lot of questions initially, and to want to have quite an in-depth relationship with someone for us to work together. And I think for me, I've learned how important curiosity is in that, both in terms of being curious about others, but being curious about ourselves. And what I found most empowering from recognizing that within myself is that's something that makes me unique and something that I can bring to work to do my job better. So if I can understand what other people are going to and understand their other people's experiences, I'm generally going to be better at my job too. And other people will have their own unique strengths that they can bring when they are their whole self at work there as well. And I think the other thing that's really key for me is not needing a reason to bring your whole self to work, not having to justify why you want to leave a little bit early, why you want to take a longer lunch break. Those are two personal things to me. I don't have children, but work-life balance is absolutely critical. I know that I can do better if I've had some time to relax and refresh in the evening. And not having children means that I also want to leave on time at the end of the day, and I don't want to give a reason for that. I just want to get up and be able to go. And I think we have to get to a place where we don't have to justify ourselves. You know, we feel that we can get up and go or do whatever it is that we need to do during the day in order to do our work as well too. And I'm trying to lean into that and hold some like myself accountable and hold myself strong to be able to do that as well too.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Alice. Just before I go on to give you a few results from the My Whole Self survey this year, which of course is 2 years after the world changed in the way that we work and the way that we think about My Whole Self. Just encourage all of you to share your own selfie. If you are on social media channels, to take a selfie of yourself and in the same way that myself and the panel did, to put some words to you and then to share those so that we've got, you know, that. I think what's so brilliant about diversity and about ourselves is that we're all different, and the more that we can demonstrate that and show that, the better. So that's the aim of the selfie. So if you do feel able to, and please do tag MHFA England and the My Whole Self campaign. So My Whole Self 2022 survey results. Just as a bit of history, we were about to launch My Whole Self on the 18th of March in 2020. Some of you might remember that March 16th was the day that we went into lockdown, and that on the 13th we got a very clear indication that that was what was going to happen. And we had a whole array of office-based events happening across across the country. We knew that organisations were going to be doing it, and I think we spent the weekend working out, well, what does that mean for this campaign? And of course, what it meant was we had to realise that taking our whole selves to work is not about the place that we go or where we are. It's about who we are in whatever that place is that we are working. And so the results, encouragingly, people feel more able to bring their whole self to work than before the pandemic. And I think, Jolawn talked about children, coming in. That's just part of working practice, and it may have been before the pandemic, but we know that for lots of people that would have felt terrifying prior to the pandemic. It's just become part of usual life. So I think, in many ways we had to, lots of us, invite people into our homes because that was where we're working as we got to grips with Zoom and Teams. One of the things which I think I found interesting and perhaps a bit surprising was that almost half of employees have said that they haven't had people checking in on their well-being in the past year. And I guess I'm interested because all around we heard people saying and talking about well-being, and well-being is undoubtedly on the agenda. But it shows that there's still much more to do. We've got to keep on making sure that we are thinking about well-being and recognising that productivity and well-being fuel each other. It's not one at the expense of each other. They go hand in hand, and encourage all workplaces to be increasing and improving the quality of those check-ins. That we know that the frequency of those check-ins has dwindled. So we mustn't, just because we've got used to working in these extraordinary circumstances, we mustn't think of this as usual. We are still working in extraordinary times, in extraordinary ways. And the things which we have learned, those of us, those organisations that have been doing those wellbeing check-ins, we mustn't take our foot off the gas is really one of the key messages which I think we're taking home from this, just because it may feel like either these are usual times or we're going forward into times which feel more familiar. We mustn't lose what we've learned about checking in with people's well-being. So now back to the panel in terms of the next question. I'm going to come to you first, Jolawn. How can we encourage managers and teams to have meaningful conversations and behave in ways that nurture and create cultures where everyone feels respected and valued at work.
Managers have a massive opportunity to have a large impact on this, I believe, in the workplace. We use this term at Headspace called compassionate leadership, and there's a formula to it. It's having deep empathy and then taking action. And the way that you can increase your empathy is by, one, changing your vocabulary. So asking your employees, what can I do to improve your mental health at work? You know, are there things that I can do to make your experience better from you in terms of your mental, your social, your physical, your financial health? And just asking and listening is step number one. The other piece around empathy, I think, is also learning about the people on your team. You know, if you have people that have different identities and from different backgrounds, and you're not a part of that community, learn about that, right? So that you can ask curious questions, you can understand and celebrate key moments that are a part of those communities where that person doesn't feel like such an outsider, and start to create a sense of belonging. And then the other piece to that equation, there's increasing empathy and then taking action. So it might be things like changing your language, making sure to share your pronouns when you start a meeting. When you think about talking about even the weather, right? It's not winter all around the world right now. Just thinking about who is your audience and what's going on in their lives, and how do you make the workplace have a stronger sense of belonging that's really specific to the people that are on your team.
Thanks, Jolawn. And yeah, that point in about times of day, and similarly when people talk about guys or don't use pronouns and you're at the beginning of meetings and things, just really some simple things which demonstrate that empathy on an everyday basis. Thanks very much. Alice, over to you.
Thank you. I want to build on Jolawn's point there around really checking in with people and being curious. And I know full well that some of my managers feel really uncomfortable about being curious, and I think we have to acknowledge that this could feel quite different to some people's leadership styles, and that curiosity is really important. I work in an industry with a lot of engineers who want a black and white answer, a right or wrong process to follow in order to do this, and that just simply doesn't exist. And I think I reiterate Jolawn's point that listening is action number one. You don't need to have the answers, you need to listen, and that is an action in itself when we're trying to have meaningful conversations. And actually through listening, that deals with some of the more uncomfortable stuff that we don't know the answer, because it's only when we listen do we understand what their answer might need to. And I think for me, to have a meaningful conversation is also acknowledging that you might hear things that you've not heard before, or experiences that you personally can't relate to. And your role as a manager there isn't to kind of rebuke what you're hearing or challenge it. It's, again, just to listen and try and learn from other people's experiences too. And I think that's really where the mental health and the inclusion agenda really come together, because inclusion is about appreciating that people have different experiences, and we need to acknowledge and do things in slightly different ways for different people. And with mental health, people have different experiences of their journey with that too. So for me, it's really about listening, acknowledging that difference, and leaning into the uncomfortableness, which might be a new skill for some people too.
Thanks very much, Alice. And Asif, can I just ask you if you've got to answer this question, but also if you've got any thoughts about when we do feel uncomfortable, when we don't feel able, when we don't feel we understand, have any tips on how to have those conversations? Because it feels to me like we believe we need to know the answers, but of course, not knowing the answers is inherent in this issue. So how do we have the conversations when we don't know the answers, which may make us feel uncomfortable?
Definitely, and I guess probably just building on Jolawn and Alice's point, because I think all the points they've said are so valid and they cover every single element that needs to be considered. Just a few things to add. I think the listening piece, which Alice mentioned, is so important, and listening without judging. The problem is we're ready to listen, but we already have preconceived answers set in our head. And that's the challenge, right? You're not really listening. You're just going through the motions of that I have to listen, but you've already got a judgment. So it's really important we challenge ourselves and we actually listen without trying to solve, because that's the other problem, that whenever we go into these conversations, any conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, number one, everyone calls up HR first to get permission to make sure we've done all the right things, we've put everything in place and all that kind of stuff. When really and truly people want to have human interactions, human conversations. Outside of work, we talk, right? We have interactions, we're respectful. Why can't we apply similar sort of mechanisms within what we do? And then this piece around uncomfortable conversations, right? I think the truth is we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we learn when we're uncomfortable, and that's just the reality of life. I'm uncomfortable speaking about certain things, but that doesn't mean that I run away from speaking about them. I try my level best. But in specific response to your question, Simon, I think it's about creating psychological safety for yourself as well going into these conversations. And just on a personal point, I go into conversations and just in advance, I do say that, look, I don't have all the answers. I might get this wrong, but I really want to learn and I really want to listen. And please do correct me, and because I'm ready to learn. And that just creates that safety net for us to have a difficult conversation. And actually, even for me to make a mistake and not feel like I'm going to get cancelled because I've said the wrong thing or, I've got it completely wrong. So I think those pieces are really, really important. And just the final piece, especially for those who work in international global organizations, one of the things I constantly hear is about this dominant culture versus non-dominant culture. And we must acknowledge that, the culture in the US, culture in the UK is not the only culture. We can't have conversations with our colleagues in Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, and then assume that they're only right, or we're going to only approach the situation from our cultural preference or our cultural standpoint in what we think, because that's wrong. I mean, they might see things completely differently, and there's nothing to say that their thinking or their views are wrong. That's their views and their culture. But I think it's really, really important, because we end up judging good by our own frame of mind, and we need to break that cycle. We go into conversations with our own frame of mind. And that needs to change if we're truly going to create a workplace that values and respects difference. And that, just final point on that doesn't mean we have to agree. There's such a misconception, especially when we speak about diversity and inclusion. I constantly hear that because of diversity and inclusion, we have to all agree. No, it doesn't. The beauty of diversity is that we think differently, but we can still learn to respect each other's differences and come together to produce exceptional results. And I think that piece is really important. So it's how do we respect different views and accept that people will think differently?
Simon, there's some questions in the chat. Is it okay if I respond to some of them?
Of course. So, go ahead.
Obviously, this is not a one size fits all where, one way to approach how do you improve mental health and create this psychological safety that works everywhere. So there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I think things that you can do as a leader is, one, model the behavior that you want to see on your team. There was a comment about, UK culture not being one to want to ask a lot of questions. And so you can start to change that by sharing, by saying, I had a tough weekend, or I had a great weekend, and here's why. You can also make statements. You don't even have to ask people, because that might feel intrusive. You can make a statement to say, I know you might be going through some tough things in your life, and I just want to let you know that I'm here if you ever want to talk, right? Where you don't even have to ask people questions. And then the last thing that you can do is build that trust with consistency. So if somebody just asks you the first time, how are you doing today? You're like, okay, great. You've never asked me before. I'm fine. And you keep going. But if somebody asks you every single Monday, right? And every time they see you, they ask you about what you shared the last time, then those are the behaviors that demonstrate that somebody is listening and they care. And so those are things managers can start to do.
Thanks, Jolawn. That's really helpful. And MHFA England, we have a question at the beginning of every one-to-one, which is, how are you and what are you doing to look after yourself? And when I first arrived at MHFA England, and I've learned an enormous amount in the 3.5 years I've been here about well-being and about self-care and around supporting ourselves and others. But I looked at that question and thought, well, that's an interesting question to start the the one-to-ones off with. But of course, it almost doesn't matter what the question is, because one of the key things is about just knowing how to start a conversation about an individual, and also having a point of reference by which you can see if things change. So by asking that question every time, you know, if I normally say, I'm really well and I've been doing loads of exercise and doing the horse and going out, and then come in one day and say, yeah, I'm well, but I haven't really been doing anything. You know, it's that, well, normally you say that, you know, that you've been seeing the horse and walking the dog and you're excited about that, but you've said you're not really doing anything. Is there anything, you know, that's causing that, or whatever language it is, that something that just says things feel different than they usually have, to give people that opportunity to open up. So thank you, Jolawn. I've just also seen in the chat there are a couple of conversations, and I think Alice, prompted perhaps by Alison, talking about children, people talking about elderly parents, or about you know, having caring responsibilities for a partner. During the pandemic, my mum was terminally ill and I went home to live with her, and just towards the last few weeks of her life, she started coming in to stand behind me in the way that we've seen lots of children doing over the lockdown, and often would have food down her front, and, you know, dishevelled and all of those sorts of things. The first time it happened, I was really embarrassed and just thought, oh my goodness, this doesn't look professional. And I was like, actually save this moment, because there aren't going to be many more of them. But then had to say to people, you don't need to feel embarrassed. You know, it's okay. If mum comes in, she'll be fine, and we'll deal with it. So I think it's all of those things, pushing ourselves and others out of our comfort zones, and acknowledging that we'll always have different experiences. So you know, it's how we use those to create positive working environments for everyone. You'll all have your own stories, and so what I'd love you to do is to share your thoughts in the chat, reflecting on how organisations can support people to bring their whole selves to work, and perhaps thinking about times when people have done that for you. I think what's wonderful about these sessions is that there's so much that you can take and learn from each other, and the danger of webinars, if we don't draw it, is that you listen but we don't learn. So we've got the opportunity to really learn from each other through this. So please do share your experiences, reflecting on how organisations can support people to bring their whole selves to work. So let me just talk to you through about a couple of further survey results from this year. What we know now is that we've had some remarkable experiences over the last couple of years. And what it's meant is that we all believe that work is going to be a little bit different. I don't think any of us know what that looks like, and I don't think we should be planning for forever, but certainly the next few months and years will be experimenting. But what people are always saying is that they want work to be really flexible, and that would be the best initiative. But only 20% said that real flexibility is on offer at their workplace. And over a third of UK workers have said a 4-day week would have a positive impact on their mental health. Now, I don't want us to get stuck down a rabbit hole of whether 4-day week is right, because the chances are it'll be right for some and not right for others. It might be 9-day fortnights, 19-day months, whatever it is, whatever combination. I think it's the principle about flexibility that feels really important. So how do we go about rethinking and redesigning workplaces so we can meet people's expectations of flexible working in ways that work for businesses, teams, and individuals? And I deliberately put businesses, teams, and individuals here because I think it's important that we hold those three things in fact. We can't just be for the individual, it can't just be for the business, it can't just be for the teams. It has to be, you know, that together. So Alice, shall we start with you again?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a really difficult question because different industries obviously have different experiences, and I come from construction where you need to be on site in order to dig the hole to deliver the work. So flexible working is something that our industry has really struggled with, but the pandemic, I mean, obviously it's a really tough 2 years, but in terms of flexible working, it's been the fast track rocket ship that we needed in order to consider flexible working. So for us, it's really important that flexible working is kind of planned into what we're doing. planning in flexible working and talking about flexible working could seem a little bit contradictory, but we have seen sites where it has worked, and it comes back to what we said earlier about having conversations about it and normalizing those conversations. So asking people what flex would they like, what's possible with their role. Is what's possible this month going to be different to what's possible next month? And exploring that as a team is really important. And I would say that's probably transferable across all industries there, but for us, the planning bit is really important. I do think there's a huge bit about leaders leading by example around this. If they're talking about flexible working, are they doing it themselves? And if no, what are the reasons behind that? It might be different to the reasons that the rest of the workforce is having around why they don't feel that they can do it, but that just opens up the transparency there too. Another thing for me, which I'm experiencing and I'm seeing in my role, is how difficult hybrid ways of working are. So we want flex, some people want to be in the office, and we're trying to find where the compromise is. And there are some things that work fantastically on hybrid meetings, this being one of them. But there are also things that we do need to be face-to-face with, or that we can do better working remotely, or working at different times too. So I think it's really important to go into the detail about flexible working and understand, when do you need to connect with your team and be together, and when do you need some space to be able to focus as well too. And I think I come from this from quite a structured way. So I'm sure Jolawn and Asif are going to talk around different aspects, but in construction engineering, for us, it's really about planning this, having conversations and acknowledging that what flex is possible this month or this year might be different from next year, and planning for those changes to take place too.
Thanks very much, Alice. Asif, you want to go next? And I guess, is there any lessons from from working in global context? I guess it would be part of my add-on for that for you and Jolawn.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the first thing to acknowledge as well is when we think about flexible working and different ways of working, sometimes there is this notion that working from home, a lot of people prefer or want, or it's ideal. I just want to flag that when you look at the last couple of years, I mean, for some people it's been liberating, it's given them the opportunity to really manage their lives better. For others, it's been very difficult. I remember when we first went into lockdown, a lot of my colleagues who were sharing houses, sharing flats with others, found it very difficult. I mean, the very privileged who had offices in their houses, who had the space, were in a better position. Similarly, we know a lot of boundaries were completely eliminated. There was this notion that if you're working from home, you're just free and you're available to speak at any point. So I think the first thing is to really understand this new hybrid working and put some of those boundaries back in, so that people can choose, people can people can have the same principles that apply to them whether they work from home or at work. And so things like working hours, things like it's okay to be offline if you're at home, because I think it's fine, right, if you're taking a lunch break or anything like that. But it doesn't seem like it is. And then the piece around coming back into the office or having the hybrid is, I think we have to acknowledge and understand, if we go back to, before the pandemic, one of the challenges for anyone who worked from home was that, we all know that sometimes the key decisions are made 5 minutes before the meeting starts, or 5 minutes after the meeting, or next to the water cooler. How do we eliminate those elements so that whoever is working from home or whoever is working flexibly doesn't feel that they're not part of the team, doesn't feel that they're missing out on key decisions? So to do that, in my view, we have to be actively inclusive, because it won't be long before many people will be in the office, and there'll be a small proportion, unfortunately, who won't be in the office, and they'll be missed out. There'll be a meeting and everyone will talk to everyone. They'll be like, "Oh, sorry, John, didn't realize you were still online," or whoever's online. I've seen that happening before. It will happen again unless we're consciously inclusive and we remember to include people. We make sure that we put in place systems and processes that don't exclude anyone, whether you're in the office or not in the office. So I think there are things we can do. And then, from an international perspective and a global perspective, I think the expectation again is that the timing, the hours, many a times, we know there's a time difference globally, but are we respectful of that when it comes to our different employees in different regions, different markets, and so on? And do we also understand the complexity, actually, to Alice's point? There's certain teams that won't have the flexibility to work flexibly. Is that right or wrong? Is that, can we change that? We can't, because there'll be certain jobs that will require people to be there, but we can create elements of flexibility within even coming into the office. So I think there's many ways that we need to look at this, but what we can't do is assume that, one solution will work for everyone or everyone will want the same thing. We must, or line managers must ask individuals what matters to them, what's important to them, what would work for them, what would be the best working environment. And I think that will hopefully help.
Brilliant, thank you, Asif. I think that bit about for some people that there is just less flexibility in the role is a reality, and when we're talking about this, we need to recognise that and be having that as part of the open and honest conversations. Jolawn, over to you. And there's a question in here which I think might play to something you could perhaps incorporate in, which is how do you influence upwards if your managers and some of the leaders don't believe in and value mental health, well-being, taking your whole self to work? So if you've got any thoughts that you could weave in, that would be wonderful.
Yes, and I'll set the context by saying a lot of the examples and tactics come from a corporate environment where a large amount of the team is working from home and you can do your work from home. So that's kind of a caveat, because that's very different than working in construction or mining. So I'll just share some of the things that I've seen to work well over the past 2 years, and hopefully maybe they might resonate. So to answer your first question, Simon, boundary setting, I think, is so powerful. And some people don't know how to do that. So you can even model that and show your manager what that looks like. I know one team, when the pandemic first started, the manager created a spreadsheet and put their working hours in there. And there was a block in the morning for, exercise or drop off. There was a block around lunch. And so everybody then felt permission to share when they weren't working, which is really what you're asking. There is an assumption that it's 24 hours. So I love that tactic, building in boundaries into the workday. So at Headspace, we do team meditations together. We have no meeting Fridays. We have blocks where you're not supposed to schedule meetings. And so there's these built-in pauses that are encouraged for you to take a break, to not have Zoom fatigue, to go on a walking one-on-one, have a phone call instead of the constant eye fatigue that happens with being on Zoom, let alone feeling like you're always on. Another thing that I've seen to be really successful is establishing team communication norms. So saying, we're going to use email for long documents. We're going to use Slack for quick questions. We're not going to text people, after this time, if that's part of the culture. And for managers to be super clear of what do you want people to say when they send an email, right? Is the round robin of thanks, is that part of the culture? Or can you just say, I just need 3 bullets on this? Because I think lots of times, getting a Slack, in the middle of the night, you interpret it one way, you send a long email, somebody sends a different document, you still don't have clarity. Getting expectations clear is so powerful in a hybrid environment when this asynchronous conversation can really skew intent and understanding. One thing that Headspace has done now that we're going back into the office is create wristbands. And so this goes to the aspect of feeling physically safe at work, where we have different colors. So red means I'm social distancing, don't hug me, don't shake my hand. Amber means I'm okay with some things, but not everything. And green means you can hug me, how are we doing? And I think that's a really great way of easing some of these boundaries that we've created over the past couple of years. And the last thing I'll say is around creating Zoom parity when you are in a hybrid situation. I'm oftentimes, in a different market, in a different time zone. And when everyone is in the room and you're the only person or the few people on Zoom, You're never called on. When you are called on, you're trying to get a word in and it feels impossible. So I think things managers can do is call on the people that are remote first for their contributions. And sometimes if you're in a room, if everyone's in the office, you can still all dial in, and then we all have the same experience in the meeting, even if then you can have the water cooler experience. We even have something for the water cooler called unstructured time, where we meet with no agenda on Zoom. And that's the, how was the weekend? You know, I have a quick question about a project. So I'm just sharing a whole bunch of different tactics that hopefully might be helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jolawn. Thank you, Asif. Thank you, Alice. We've now got a poll to ask you, just to get a sense of the almost 500 of you on this webinar. How confident do you feel to express your whole self in your workplace? And so the poll should pop up now. Confident, somewhat confident, or not confident. And be great just to get a sense of where we're at the moment. Okay, hopefully everyone should have had a chance to put their mark in the circle. Happy, are we able to close? Yeah, okay. So we got 39% who are confident, 51% who are somewhat confident, so some of the time, confident in sharing the whole self, and 10% not confident. Okay, so I guess, you know, let's take comfort from 40%, 4 out of 10 people saying they feel confident, and that 50% are somewhere on that journey, and hope that those of you who are not confident can take some confidence from that fact. And I think just to go right back to the beginning, both Alice and Asif talked about this being a journey, and I suspect that none of us feel confident all of the time. Yeah, I'm a almost 50-year-old gay man who's been coming out twice a week, every week since 1992 or something like that. And sometimes it feels almost as scary as the first time. Yeah, and there are moments where we're thrown in or reminded of childhood. I have moments where suddenly I'm like a 14-year-old again, and in relation to that. So this will always be a journey. In our moments, there'll be confident times and less confident times. So all I'd say is, it really is important, and it's worth the effort and worth the conversations and worth taking the deep breaths. And if it really is a place where we can't, think about what options do we have to change this? What choices do we have in relation to either changing where we are or changing how the place we are is. So it'd be interesting to see how that changes. But let's keep a record of this, Abby, and then see how that changes for next year. Okay, so we're fast running out of time, as always, with these webinars. So, Jolawn, I'm going to come back to you. How do we ensure that diversity, intersectionality, inclusion, and belonging are at the heart of wellbeing strategies, so we really can bring our whole selves to work?
Yes, I think it starts with having a diverse workforce. So having policies that bring as many different types of candidates to the table as possible. Of course, hiring, developing, and promoting people equally in the organization. So you have to look at the data. I love the term, you measure what you treasure. And so if organizations are looking at their statistics and saying, oh, wow, all of the top management roles are held by men. Why is that, right? Is there something systematic in our processes where there's only men that are on the hiring panel? I remember in one organization, a group of engineers wanted to diversify their team, and there was no men on the hiring panel. And so that was step number one, is start to diversify every step of your talent acquisition process, as well as how do you mentor, how do you develop, what's your rate of promotion, so that you're reflecting the customers and community that you're serving in every aspect of the organization.
Brilliant, thanks. Thank you, Jolawn. Asif.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's the biggest thing is culture. How do we create a culture of inclusion? diversity in itself is so many different things. Intersectionality we know is important, and we must value what we see, but also what we don't see, which makes up, a person's whole identity. Inclusion is great, someone being part of something, but unless they belong and can bring their authentic self, it's pointless. So having diversity and inclusion by itself doesn't work. Belonging really drives that, where people can be themselves. But it has to be a culture of inclusion for actually strategies to really be embedded and work. I mean, we can talk about principles around strategies, things people can incorporate in strategies, make sure they're inclusive, make sure they capture everyone, which is all amazing work. But if your culture within your organization is not one of inclusion, is not one of belonging, is not one that values difference, then it's very, very difficult for anything to truly be embedded. And I think once we start creating that culture, and to create culture, it has to be weaved into everything that we do. It can't sit as a separate piece somewhere. Diversity can't be that conversation 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting or 5 minutes at the end. If we truly believe in it, everything we do within an organization should weave it in. We should all champion it from the privileges we have within our organizations, or the positions of power, influence, and just make it become an everyday conversation. And that will truly, in my view, ensure that people can bring their whole self, and people, well-being is at the heart of what we want to achieve. But it really and truly can't be a side conversation. It can't be something that we do when something happens, and then we start to forget very quickly, and then we do again when something else happens. It just has to become more proactive and natural for us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Alice.
Thank you, Asif. I think you explained it really, really well there about the importance of culture, and I completely agree. I think another result to that is how diversity and inclusion can shed light on the well-being side of things, and vice versa. Well-being can shed light on what might be missing from your diversity and inclusion strategy, and they together work together to bring your whole self to work. So what I really mean by that is, we know that carers, I think it's something like 35% of carers typically struggle with their mental health. For members of the LGBT+ population, it's even higher. And knowing where those people sit in our diversity and inclusion strategy can help pinpoint what's needed from the wellbeing perspective, and then link into that culture that Asif mentioned, but also vice versa. And something I've been thinking about recently is the idea of mental health and well-being. It can be kind of a temporary thing, so something that somebody struggles with on a temporary basis, and where does that sit in your inclusion journey, and how do you include how does that, what journey does that employee take? But also somebody who struggles with their mental health on, for their entire life, or for really prolonged periods of time, and what inclusion strategy is needed around that, and what culture is needed there too. And I think they're just two examples of where these agendas really lean on each other and can help shed light as to what an organization needs to do specifically. So I think that whole self, bringing our whole self to work, you need to consider both sides of the inclusion and diversity and the wellbeing coin in order to get there. And I think that links into what Asif was saying earlier about building that culture as well too.
Brilliant. Jolawn, did you have anything you wanted to add to this one?
There was a great comment in the chat about it starts at the top, and I wholeheartedly agree. Hiring leadership that values diversity and belonging is a must. And I think, behaviors have to support what people say. And so when you look at people's teams, does it reflect what they say is important to them? When you look at how people, the levels of engagement, when you look at, how customers are even served on those teams, does it reflect, again, the values of the world at large? And so I'm just +1ing to that comment in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you, Jolawn. And I would just say, I've just looked to see what my chair was saying when I saw that comment about it comes from the top. So her My Whole Self quote, this is, "My whole self is a beautiful mix of contradictions. I'm intersectional." So that's my chair, Ada Paris, on this. And I love that bit about the contradictions. But just the other bit, which I guess just listening to all three of you, is that sometimes we've learned that there is only one way of being at work, and we have to shred ourselves of that sense if we're really going to value it. And I've been doing an activity for many years, which is about just saying to people when you do some personality testing, you yellows, you greens, you blues, you reds, you'll go off in your groups and just plan a party, plan the Christmas party. We've done well, money's not an object. And some people will still talk about money, date, budgets, Others will go, we're taking everyone to Dubai or to the Caribbean or whatever it is. And others will be like, what's the purpose? You know, and actually, once you think about that, then you really recognize that we all bring something special. And it's how we make sure those special gifts all get used to maximum impact for ourselves and others. Really conscious of time. I want to say thank you to the panel. I want to say thank you to you all for being here, but also thank you to Abby, Leonie, Sarah, and the team who've put all the legwork in to make this work. We've obviously come and sat and had a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Jolawn, Alice, Asif. But let me talk you through very quickly. We are publishing today some new My Whole Self talking tips. So if you go online, you'll see those. We'd encourage you to really keep talking. This is, as I say, this is a 365 program of work. It's not a one day a year piece of work. Please do spread the word. And then also, at the heart of this is diversity and inclusion. And we have done some guidance for supporting people of colour and Black colleagues, which we produced in 2020 in the context of some of the particular things which were happening in the world around racism, structural racism, etc. So can I just go on to the last slide, which is that we really need to think about creating a well-being strategy that is right for us in our own organisations. We've said time and again there isn't one size fits all. If you want support with that, please do contact us. There's an email address here. We'll also follow up. There is a recording from today, which will go onto our YouTube channel, whatever it is, YouTube channel, and onto our website, but we'll also make sure you get that. So a great big noisy round of applause to our panelists, to all of you and to the team that have made today happen. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and just keep taking your whole self to work. There is only one of yourself, and it's great to have it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.